Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. They say every man thinks he's prepared for the end of the world, right up until the moment it actually knocks on his door. I'm Mark, and for years I was that guy. Ex-army. Ranger tab on a uniform I hadn't worn in a decade, but the mindset? That never really leaves you. I live out on the edge of Marion, Ohio, in a little place with enough land for my German shepherd, Ghost, to run himself tired, and enough privacy that my, let's call them contingency plans, didn't raise too many eyebrows with the neighbors. My job as a maintenance supervisor at a small industrial complex nearby was straightforward, paid the bills, and mostly left me to my own thoughts. And a lot of those thoughts revolved around what if. What if the power grid collapsed? What if society just frayed at the seams? Just try to feel that autumn chill on your skin, the kind that makes you pull your jacket a little tighter. That's how late October felt in Marion that year. Halloween decorations were already starting to pop up on lawns, grinning plastic pumpkins and faded ghosts hanging from porch railings. It was all so normal, deceptively so. I often wonder, what's the one mistake that could unravel years of preparation? For me, it wasn't a lack of supplies or a flaw in my bug-out plan. It was the insidious creep of normalcy, the way the world can lull you into a false sense of security right before it yanks the rug out from under you. The news had been filled with static for weeks. Reports of a virulent flu in some far-flung corner of the globe, then closer in Europe, then whispers of it hitting the coasts. You know how it is, background noise, something happening to other people. But the sirens, they were different. More frequent, sharper somehow, like they were wailing with a new kind of urgency. It's a simple trick, really, to gauge the tension in your town before things go sideways. Listen to the sounds that are usually just part of the urban wallpaper. Are they changing? Ours were. Even Ghost, usually a stoic presence at my feet, seemed more alert, his ears perking at sounds I barely registered, a low growl sometimes rumbling in his chest when the wail of an ambulance cut through the evening quiet. He was my four-legged early warning system, more reliable than any news channel. Why even the most seasoned survivalist can get caught off guard is simple. Life has a nasty habit of throwing punches when you're looking the other way, admiring your own preparedness. The normalcy, you see, it was like a thin sheet of ice over deep, dark water, and if you listened close enough, you could hear it starting to crack. I remember thinking, even with all my gear stashed, my go-bags packed, that the odds of needing it were still abstract. That was my mistake. Believing even for a moment that it couldn't happen here. It's a dangerous lullaby, that one, the kind that makes you vulnerable right when you need to be at your sharpest. The air itself felt charged, like before a summer thunderstorm. But this was autumn, and the storm gathering on the horizon wasn't one of rain and lightning. It was something far colder, far more final. The first real tremor hit on a Tuesday. I was at the complex, dealing with a busted compressor unit, grease up to my elbows, the kind of mundane problem that usually filled my days. The radio in the workshop, usually tuned to a classic rock station, had been cutting in and out with emergency broadcast tests, then actual bulletins that were vague and unsettling. Officials advise residents to remain calm and stay indoors. That's always a good sign, isn't it? Like telling a kid not to press the big red button. Ghost was back at the house, thankfully. I'd started leaving him there more often. The atmosphere in town was getting twitchy. People were jumpier, their eyes darting around. That afternoon, I decided to swing by the Walmart on Richland Road on my way home, pick up a few extra cans of dog food for Ghost and some batteries. Just a routine stop. For so I thought. The parking lot was a zoo. Cars were parked haphazardly, some blocking others in. People were streaming out, carts overflowing not with groceries but with water, canned goods, ammunition, if the shelves hadn't already been stripped bare. It was a low simmering panic, the kind that hasn't quite boiled over into screams but is dangerously close. Picture this. You're in your local grocery store, a place you've been 100 times, and suddenly the mundane errand turns into a desperate scramble. What's the first thing you grab? For most, it's whatever they think they'll run out of first. For me, it was information. I saw the fear in their eyes, the way they clutched their purchases like life rafts. This wasn't a snowstorm coming. This was something else. The hidden trap most survivors, or soon-to-be survivors, fall into during these first moments of panic is focusing on the wrong things. They hoard toilet paper, but forget a good water filter. They grab guns, but have no training. I turned around, didn't even go inside. The air was thick with desperation, a tangible thing. Back in my truck, I flicked on the radio. Static, across all channels. Then a voice, breathless, terrified. "Vertud, they're not stopping. God, their eyes, red eyes. They're so fast." Then a scream and silence. Just pure, chilling silence. My blood ran cold. Red eyes, fast. That wasn't any flu I'd ever heard of. That sounded like something ripped from a nightmare. My ranger training, the muscle memory, it started to kick in. A cold calm spreading through my veins, pushing past the initial shock. What your instincts are screaming during chaos is usually pretty simple. Run, hide, fight. The trick is knowing when to listen and which instinct to prioritize. Right then, mine was screaming, "Get home, secure perimeter, assess." I lived on a small county road a couple of miles out from the main part of Marion. As I got closer, I saw the first real sign. A car slewed across the road, driver's side door hanging open, an eerie stillness about it. I slowed, my hand instinctively going to the .45 I always kept in the console. That's when I saw him, or it, stumbling out of the woods, clothes torn, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. It wasn't until it turned its head towards my truck that I saw them, the eyes. Dull red like dying embers, but filled with a horrifying, predatory focus. It let out this sound. Not a groan, not a growl, but something wet and guttural, and it started moving towards me, faster than any sick person should be able to move. Myths about outrunning the infected, well, they were about to be rewritten. Speed wasn't just a factor. It was a defining characteristic of these things. I didn't hesitate. I stomped on the gas, swerving around it, the image of those red eyes burning into my brain. The town's thin veneer of order hadn't just cracked. It had shattered like glass. Back at my house, Ghost met me at the door, whining, sensing the change in me, the scent of adrenaline. The first 48 hours had begun, and the world I knew was already a ghost. The drive from that first encounter back to my small house on the outskirts of Marion was a blur of calculated risks. My mind, honed by years of army training and a lifetime of what some called paranoia, was already sifting through options, discarding dead ends. The main roads like Route 23 or 4 would be suicide traps choked with panicked drivers, and I now suspected these infected. What a Navy SEAL would say about your plan in this situation is probably something concise like, adapt or die. There's no room for sentiment when the world's actively trying to eat you. I took the back roads, gravel paths, and little-used county lanes I knew like the back of my hand from years of running Ghost and scouting the area. Even then, the signs were everywhere. Abandoned cars, some with doors ajar, others crashed into ditches. Wisps of smoke on the horizon, the distant sporadic crackle of gunfire. It's an overlooked danger, thinking that just because you're away from the city center, you're safe. Trouble has a way of spreading like blood in water. I had to make a detour through a residential area, closer to town, to check on Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow who lived alone. Call it a lingering sense of duty, or maybe just a stupid risk. She'd always been kind, slipping Ghost treats over the fence. Her house was dark, no answer. The front door was slightly ajar. A knot formed in my stomach. Feel that knot in your stomach as you choose, I often tell myself in training scenarios. This was real. I pushed the door open, 45 drawn, Ghost at my heel, hackles raised. The living room was a mess, overturned furniture, a shattered lamp. And then I saw her, or what was left of her, in the kitchen. The transformation was horrific. Those same red eyes, the torn flesh. She lunged. It wasn't Mrs. Henderson anymore. It was just a thing. Ghost reacted before I did, a blur of fur and teeth intercepting her, giving me the second I needed. One shot head, the training kicked in, the thing dropped. But the sound of the shot, even suppressed, felt deafening in the sudden silence. Why silence is your greatest weapon. When the streets are swarming became brutally apparent. Noise was a dinner bell. We had to go. Leaving her like that, it was a heavy weight. The emotional toll of leaving someone behind, even when they're no longer themselves, it's a unique kind of hell. Back in the truck, Ghost was whining, licking my hand. He'd taken a shallow scratch on his flank, Nothing serious, but it was a stark reminder of his vulnerability. And mine. He wasn't just a dog. He was my partner, my responsibility. His senses were sharper than mine, his loyalty absolute. He'd proven that just now. Navigating the rest of the way was a grim obstacle course. A 3-step method to assess a route when every second counts. Scout, identify choke points, and commit. I saw a small family, a young couple with 2 terrified kids trying to load a minivan, fumbling with bags, their movements jerky with panic. The father waved frantically at me. I slowed, my heart warring with my head. Helping them would mean delay, exposure. Not helping. The streets were a maze designed by a malevolent god, and every turn presented a new test, not just of skill, but of who you were, or who you were becoming. I tossed them a spare medkit and a couple of MREs from my truck bed. Get out of the open! Barricade somewhere solid, away from main roads. Gereiselt then gunned the engine. I couldn't take them, not without a secure destination, not with the risk they'd bring. It felt like a betrayal, but Sun Tzu's wisdom echoed. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sometimes, that meant avoiding engagements, even moral ones, if they compromised the primary objective, survival. The smoke was thicker now, the smell of burning plastic and something else, something metallic and coppery, tainting the air. Marion was bleeding out. My house wasn't a fortress, but it was defensible. Brick construction, solid doors, and I'd reinforced the windows years ago. It was set back from the road, surrounded by a thicket of trees I'd deliberately allowed to grow dense. The first thing I did was a perimeter sweep with Ghost. Nothing immediate, but the distant sounds, screams, the occasional burst of automatic fire now, were getting closer. Inside, the familiar scent of home was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just driven through. But the emotional toll of fleeting safety is that a prepper's mind never truly rests. This wasn't a haven. It was a temporary rally point. Take a deep breath with me. Even in a locked room with your supplies around you, can you truly feel safe when the world outside is screaming its death throes? I couldn't. I went through my inventory. My Remington 870 shotgun, plenty of buckshot and slugs. My AR-15, several loaded magazines. The 45, now cleaned and reloaded. Hunting knives, a machete, food, water, medical supplies. Enough for months if I was careful. What most survivors miss in the first 12 hours is the vital intel that's slipping away. They focus on barricades and bullets, but information is just as crucial. I had a high-end police scanner and a ham radio setup. The scanner was a cacophony of panicked voices, overrun call signs, pleas for help that went unanswered. All units, code black, repeat, code black. City is lost. I repeat, Marion is lost, evacuate if able. Fort Sill's emergency protocol is, static. Fort Sill's? That was a National Guard training base 60 miles south. If they were activating emergency protocols, this was bigger than Marion. The ham radio was worse. Snatches of conversations from across Ohio, then Indiana, Pennsylvania. Same story. Fast red-eyed attackers, military units overwhelmed or vanished. It was like watching a map of civilization extinguish, light by light. Ghost nudged my hand, his big brown eyes full of concern. I knelt, checked his scratch again, already clotting, and just held him for a minute. His warmth, his steady breathing, it was an anchor in the storm. He didn't understand the words on the radio, but he understood the fear, the tension. He licked my face, a brief moment of connection, of shared existence in a world gone mad. But even that quiet moment was pierced. A new sound. Closer this time, a scraping, dragging noise from outside the back door, then a wet, guttural snarl. They were here. The silence in my refuge, that thin blanket, had just been torn to shreds. A quick tactic to stay calm under zombie attack, especially when you're seemingly trapped, is to focus on the immediate threat and your immediate response. No room for what-ifs or panic. Just action. The fight was no longer out there. It had come home. The back door, solid oak reinforced with a steel plate, shuddered under a heavy impact. Then another. Ghost was at my side, a low, continuous growl vibrating through his chest, his eyes fixed on the door. My shotgun felt like an extension of my arm. This was it. The place I'd poured years of preparation into, my sanctuary, was about to become a battleground. A survival metaphor for facing hordes often involves funneling them, but when they're already at your door, it's about managing breaches and holding choke points. The wood around the deadbolt splintered. What a Navy SEAL would say about your close-quarters battle plan is probably something along the lines of violence of action. Hesitation gets you killed. The door burst inward with a splintering crack, and two of them stumbled through, red eyes glowing in the dim light filtering from the boarded windows. They were fast, lunging almost immediately. The first one went down to a blast of buckshot to the chest. Not ideal, I wanted headshots, but it was point blank. It staggered but didn't stop. These things were relentless. The second one, a lanky figure that might have been a teenager, clawed its way over its fallen comrade. Ghost met it head-on, a snarling, snapping fury of black and tan fur. He latched onto its arm, buying me a precious second. I racked the pump, aimed and fired. The head exploded in a spray of gore. But more were coming. I could hear them now, scrabbling at the windows, more thudding at the breached back door. The unseen cost of fighting alone, even with a loyal companion, is that you can only cover so much ground. My house, my fortress, was rapidly becoming a trap. I fell back, room by room, Ghost covering my retreats. His barks and snarls a terrifying counterpoint to the guttural sounds of the infected. The living room, then the hallway. Each doorway was a new defensive line, each shot a dwindling resource. I switched to my AR-15, the 223 rounds more effective for headshots, but the noise was a magnet. I saw Mrs. Henderson's face in my mind. No, not her face, the thing's face. These weren't people anymore. Annihilating that thought was critical to survival. Feel your back against the wall, weapon in hand, the snarls getting closer. What's the one thought that keeps you fighting? For me it was Ghost. It was the stubborn refusal to just lie down and die in my own home. They were coming through a shattered window in the spare bedroom now. I could hear the glass crunching underfoot. I was being outflanked, cornered. My ammo was running low for the rifle. I had maybe 2 magazines left. My carefully laid plans, my stockpiles, they meant nothing if I couldn't hold this ground. Then a crash from the front of the house, the main door. They were everywhere. It was a tide of infected, and my home was a sandcastle crumbling under the waves. I remember a moment of chilling clarity. I wasn't going to win this fight. Not here, not like this. The objective shifted from defend to escape. Ghost seemed to understand, staying close, watching my every move. We made it to the garage, the internal door still holding. As I fumbled with the lock, an infected hand, rotted and grasping, punched through the drywall beside the doorframe. I fired my last rifle round into it, then drew my .45. The garage door, a heavy roll-up, was my only way out. I hit the opener, the motor grinding laboriously. It felt like an eternity. As it rose, revealing the grey, chaotic dawn, more of them were already lurching in from the driveway. We had to move now. The objective was clear: get out of Marion. The radio chatter, fragmented as it was, had mentioned a military checkpoint being set up near the county line. South on Route 23, it was a long shot, maybe already overrun, but it was the only concrete goal I had. My pickup truck, a sturdy Ford F-150, was in the garage. The one item you'd regret leaving behind when you have minutes to evacuate? For me, it was less an item and more a capability, reliable transport. We piled in, Ghost in the passenger seat, his breathing ragged. I slammed the truck into reverse, crashing through the remaining infected in the driveway, then fishtailed onto the road, heading south. Picture yourself driving, pedal to the metal. The road ahead a blur of chaos and hope. Can you feel the desperation? The sheer will to make it? That was me, every nerve-ending screaming. The journey was a nightmare. Main roads were clogged with abandoned vehicles, some burning. I navigated through fields, across lawns, using the truck's four-wheel drive to its limit. We passed Marion Harding High School, its football field, usually a place of Friday night lights and community pride, now eerily silent, a few lone figures stumbling across the turf. How military veterans outsmart infected is often by using their predictability against them. These things were drawn to noise and movement. I used that, laying on the horn to draw a cluster away from a narrow side street I needed to take, then cutting the engine and coasting past once they'd moved. But they were everywhere. It was a race against time, the fuse burning shorter with every mile. Then came the moment that almost broke me. We were crossing a small bridge over the Olentangy River, a local landmark. A group of infected were clustered at the far end. I tried to power through, but one of them, faster than the others, lunged at the passenger side. It slammed against Ghost's window, cracking the glass, its grotesque face inches from him, red eyes burning with mindless hunger. Ghost snarled, snapping, but the creature's weight was immense. The window started to give. My heart leapt into my throat. Without thinking, I swerved hard, slamming the side of the truck against the bridge railing. The infected was crushed, falling away, but the sudden maneuver sent us into a skid. For a terrifying second, I thought we were going over the edge into the river. I wrestled with the wheel, tires screaming, and managed to regain control, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Ghost was whining, nuzzling my arm, clearly shaken but unharmed. That wave of relief, so potent it was almost sickening, washed over me. He was okay. We were okay for now. Myths about safe zones are plentiful, and the truth nobody tells you until it's too late is that most aren't safe at all. They're just targets with bigger walls. As we got closer to where the checkpoint was supposed to be, the signs became more ominous. More military vehicles abandoned. Not fewer. The radio, when I could get a signal, was just static or looped warnings about the pathogen and quarantine zones that sounded more like besieged fortresses than places of rescue. We were nearing the supposed checkpoint, but instead of order I saw more chaos, smoke billowing from beyond a rise. This wasn't looking like a sanctuary. It was looking like another fight. The checkpoint on Route 23 was a disaster. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a slaughterhouse, overrun. Burning vehicles, the dead and the undead littering the highway. A few soldiers were making a last stand behind a wrecked Humvee, their muzzle flashes tiny sparks in the growing gloom of late afternoon. There was no escape here, only a bigger trap. My heart sank. That glimmer of hope, the idea of reaching safety and order, evaporated. But I remembered a contingency, a deep woods bug-out location I'd scouted years ago, miles off the main road, near the border of the Delaware Wildlife Area. It was a long shot, requiring cross-country travel, but it was better than this. A three-step method to secure a new safe house when you're on the run: assess defensibility, check resources, and cover your tracks. This wasn't a house, but an old forgotten hunter's cabin. Getting there was another gauntlet. We had to abandon the truck eventually, the terrain too rough. On foot, with Ghost at my side, we moved through the dense woods, the sounds of the collapsing world slowly fading behind us, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds that hadn't yet realized the apex predator had changed. The survival psychology behind finding hope when everything seems lost is often about focusing on the next small step, the next attainable goal. For me, it was reaching that cabin. After what felt like an eternity, navigating by compass and landmarks I'd memorized, we found it. Small, dilapidated but structurally sound, and most importantly isolated. Untouched. The final obstacle was a small horde that had wandered near a creek by the cabin, drawn perhaps by deer. We had to be smart. I used the last of my energy to create a diversion, throwing rocks to trigger car alarms in a distant abandoned farmhouse I'd passed, drawing most of them away. We slipped past the remaining few, Ghost moving like a shadow. Inside the cabin it was dusty, cold but blessedly quiet. One room, a stone fireplace, a couple of rickety bunks. I barricaded the door with fallen timbers, checked the rotten shutters. It was primitive, but for the first time in what felt like days, I could breathe. Ghost collapsed by the hearth, exhausted but alert. I checked him over, shared the last of my water from my canteen and a protein bar. Take a moment to think about who you'd fight that hard for. Hold that image in your mind. That's the core of survival. For me, it was the loyal animal at my feet, the silent promise I'd made to protect him. We weren't safe, not truly. The radio, before the batteries died, had hinted at the infection spreading like wildfire, uncontrolled. This was just a pause, a respite. So I reflected on the losses. Mrs. Henderson, the family I couldn't help, the town of Marion itself consumed. Subtle signs you're losing your edge include letting despair creep in. I fought it back. We were alive. That was a victory, however costly, however temporary. The world outside had transformed into a charnel house, but in this tiny, forgotten cabin for a brief moment, there was a fragile peace. The first light of the second day crept through the cracks in the cabin's shutters, painting stripes across the dusty floor. Ghost was already awake, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes followed my every move. We'd made it through the initial 48 hours. 48 hours that felt like 48 years. Close your eyes for a second. Feel that fragile sense of peace after the storm. The exhaustion so deep it's in your bones. What's the first thing you do to prepare for the next one? For me, it was reconnaissance and fortification. I spent the morning scouting the immediate area around the cabin, Ghost at my side, silent and watchful. The old hunter's well still had water, though it would need boiling. I found a small overlooked root cellar, perfect for storing the few supplies I'd managed to salvage from my truck before abandoning it. Reflecting on those first 2 days, it was clear that my ranger training, the years of prepping, had given me an edge. But nothing, truly nothing, could have prepared me for the sheer speed and ferocity of it all, for the sight of familiar faces twisted into monstrous parodies, for the red eyes. The emotional toll of leaving normal behind is a quiet burden, a constant hum beneath the surface of tactical decisions. Marion, my home, the faces I knew, all gone or changed. Why survival isn't just strength, it's strategy, and the will to adapt. I'd been strong, I'd been strategic, but the adaptation, that was an ongoing process. I had started as a lone survivalist, convinced of my self-reliance, but Ghost, he wasn't just a companion. He was a lifeline. His unwavering loyalty, his senses, his courage, they'd saved me more than once. He was a constant, warm presence in a world that had turned impossibly cold. What your instincts will be screaming after the initial chaos subsides slightly is that this isn't an event, it's a new reality. The long game of survival was just beginning. I looked at Ghost, who thumped his tail softly against the floorboards. We were a team, battered, exhausted, but unbroken. The nightmare was spreading. The radio had made that clear before it died. This little cabin was a temporary sanctuary, not a final destination, but we were alive, and we would face whatever came next together. The world was a broken mirror, and we were all just trying to find a piece that still reflected something of who we were, or who we hoped to become. For now we had this moment, this quiet dawn, and then we would prepare survivors. That's where my story of the first 48 hours ends, but it's really just the beginning of a much longer journey. Tell us what you'd do in this outbreak, the critical choices you'd make in those first chaotic hours, or suggest the next profession you'd like to hear a story from. Your insights and ideas fuel this community. Stay safe out there and stay prepared.